Hi, Boedi Widjaja. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be speaking with you, Rami. Yeah, it's been a while since we last spoke.
Yeah, since 2017. So thank you so much for joining us in this series of the 2020 online. It is a partnership between the Jerusalem Biennale and the Marilyn Meyerson JCC Manhattan. It's a series of talks in which we're talking with creative minds, creative artists, and curators around the world to see how they are doing, what they are doing, and how the situation with the coronavirus and the social distancing will affect or already affects their work. Today we are with my friend Boedi Widjaja, who was named one of the ArtReview Asia FutureGreats 2014, a very promising and leading artist. Boedi Widjaja was born in 1975 in Indonesia and migrated to Singapore at the age of 9, separated from his parents. His practice draws on his own lived experiences, investigating concerns regarding diaspora, hybridity, travel, and isolation. And that's before the corona started. Boedi is trained as an architect and also has a background in graphic design. Maybe we should just start with asking you, Boedi, how are you? How are things now in Singapore?
Well, me and my family, we are good. Basically, life has changed since the outbreak of the virus. And I think around 1 month ago, the Singapore government announced a soft lockdown, meaning that families and households are now not supposed to leave our homes except for the most essential services, such as buying food or going to the market. Yeah, I mean, like everyone else in the world, our daily lives has been transformed very significantly because of that. Yeah.
I think what's interesting maybe about Singapore, maybe for us in Israel and other places in the world to learn from is that for you, it's not the first breakout, right? The corona started and then stopped in a way, was handled, and now it's breaking out again.
Yes, that's right. So we are right now in the middle of the third wave. The government has shown us this graph with 3 different curves on it. The first curve basically happened, I believe, at the beginning of February, very near the first outbreak in Wuhan, China, because Singapore is a travel hub, hence we are very, very porous. That was contained in a matter of, I believe, a few weeks. And then what happened was we started to have overseas Singaporeans, Singaporeans who are studying overseas or working overseas, coming back to the country. And that created the second wave. However, the third wave that we are experiencing right now, that was, I guess, that began about a month ago, is due mainly to the large population of migrant workers in Singapore. And these are workers who live in relatively dense dormitories. And as the government and the experts discovered the nature of this coronavirus, they found out that many of our migrant workers have in fact been infected by the virus and yet remain asymptomatic. Therefore, the spread of the virus was a very silent one. And by the time they were discovered, we had in our hands thousands upon thousands of infected migrant workers. And right now we are already a month into the soft lockdown, and we are still seeing very high numbers of daily cases among the migrant workers. What the government is doing is that they have been ramping up the daily number of tests. From what I could read in the mainstream broadsheets, is that there are, I think, about 3,000 tests being done every day. And for the past 1 week at least, we are seeing numbers daily of infected cases among migrant workers in the range of 900 to 1,000.
Wow. So basically the way it affects your life and your family, so the lockdown was released completely and then it came back, or what exactly happened? Like, we're here in Jerusalem, are actually now in a point where we were at home very long time, almost 2 months, with no schools, no option to go to work, going out only to buy groceries and stuff. And now, just now, this is like the first days in which the prohibitions are a bit less. So people are going out, and you can see a lot of more people out in the streets. Some of the children went back to school. So can we expect like to withdraw like in Singapore? What was it like with you?
Well, we still have about 1 month more to go with the soft lockdown. The government has announced that there will be a slight easing of the lockdown, but they have not really said that we can leave our homes as per normal. I think that is something in the cards, but you know, we are still waiting for further announcements from the Ministry of Health. But as soon as the 5th of May, and I think the 12th of May, we will be seeing gradual easing, such as certain services being allowed to reoperate again.
Yes. So we will soon speak about how the whole situation, the quarantine and the corona affect your work. But maybe first, let's say get to know you a little better and your previous work. So I thought maybe we should start, and I'll share the screen now. Maybe we should start with the project that you presented as part of the Jerusalem Biennale 2017. So we're seeing it right now on the screen. It's taken from your website. So can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Sure, yeah, it's my pleasure. So it was a very exciting presentation for us to be able to show a work in Jerusalem. It was a very eye-opening experience for me and Audrey, my wife, who also works with me on this project. The work comes from one of the major series in my practice called storytelling. I have always been interested in the use of stones to evoke memories and to think about memories. As you had briefly explained in the beginning of the talk, I left my homeland in Indonesia when I was a child, when I was a 9-year-old child. And I came to Singapore together with my elder sister without our parents. And since then, I wasn't able to go back to Indonesia anymore. And pretty much my relationship with my homeland was extremely mediated one. It relied a lot on memories and also a mediated way of interaction through images, through footages in the news, and so forth and so forth. Hence, when I use these stones to produce abstract marks on paper, I'm trying to use a tactile haptic method of physically touching the stones, which are essentially pieces of the earth, pieces of the land, to then create abstract and somewhat floating images on paper. So there are two experiences that I would like to highlight. One which has to do with touch and sensation, and the other which has a lot to do with imagination and the imaginary. And this is really the premise for storytelling. For this particular work, From the Earth Black, that I presented in Jerusalem Biennale 2017, I combined stone prints that I had made in Singapore, and also part of them made in Malaysia, in another arts festival, with a live art participatory component that happened in the Hamaktarot Museum in Jerusalem, where I invited members of the audience to join me in first preparing the ink using a very traditional Chinese method of preparing ink, and then to make their unique stone print on the communal piece of paper, and then to come back later to discover the unique stone print that they have made.
So this image that is now on the screen is a great reminder. I remember that I also participated, and like you can see in the photo, I enjoyed it very much.
Yes,
I was very happy to use my hands a little bit, and I was very excited about the technique and the ink and the whole thing about writing the parts of the ink. So it was extremely enjoyable, and this is basically the outcome, right? It looks like this, and many other people, of course, took part in this. And you collected some of the stones also in Jerusalem, if I remember.
That's right. I had a great time walking around the old city. I am thankful to Ofer Grunwald, a Jerusalem-based artist at the time, who so kindly took time to guide me around the old city. If I remember correctly, I think we went to this valley.
I think it was Enkarem, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was near Nehemiah's tomb or something. And yeah, there were these pieces of stones and rocks of different kinds. I think there were stones from, there were limestones, there were flint, and there were all kinds of I think, volcanic-based rocks or stones as well that we collected. And these stones were later used to emboss or engrave outlines around the ink marks that were made using the Singapore stones. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then this same project was continued in other places, and in each place you collect the local stones.
Yes. I am very interested, obviously, in the geological aspects of a place. However, quite recently, I started to work using a new technique, which is shown in the second image. The second image, yeah, this one, yes. Where I was thinking again along the line of the mediated image or memory, and the image of the stone, and I started to play around with a technique where I could, I think, evoke the presence of this stone mark without actually using a real stone.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, the images that you see here were frottages or rubbings that was purely done through the hand without the physical presence of any stones. Mm. And I was interested in that because the idea of the land, the idea of being able to physically touch the land is further abstracted, is further mediated through this technique, which is very much in line with the thought process along the stonetelling series. Mm-hmm. And if you look closely at this image, mm-hmm. There are also writings behind the rubbings, and those writings were tracings that I made of my father's handwriting of a 4-line poem that again speaks about my relationship with the land. Mm.
And the 4-line poems are a unique structure of Indonesian or Singaporean poetry, or not necessarily?
Yeah, it has references to an ancient Indonesian poem, specifically a Javanese poem, because that was where my hometown is, in the central part of the Java island. Mm-hmm. And there was an ancient 4-line poem that also formed the alphabet for an ancient Javanese script, which is believed to come down from Sanskrit. Oh. And what I did was I wrote this poem using the 4-line structure, but what I also did was to then reposition each of these lines to create different permutations of this poem. Hence, the poems that were written behind these rubbings were of the same, but each was also different from each other.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful installation. It's very clean and sharp. And maybe we should go now to the next project that we wanted to show. It has 2 versions. It's called the Black Hat twice, and it has 2 versions. This is one of the versions. What do we see here? Can you see it, or it's not?
No, I can't see the images.
So sorry, wait. I'm still, I'm getting better from a talk to another, but I'm still not.
Yes,
Let's see.
this is all relatively new to me as well.
Okay, I think now you'll see it.
Yes.
Okay, so it's called Black Hat, and it's in the Singapore Center. Where was it exhibited?
So yeah, maybe to give you a little bit of a background to this project, Black Hat is part of Diptych. So there's a two-part to this project. One that is right now on the screen that was presented during the Singapore Biennale last year until up to March this year. And the first part was presented earlier in Australia, in Brisbane, as part of the Asia Pacific Triennale at the Queensland Art Gallery. So the title actually reflects the two part, hence there are two black hats in the title. Black Hat is again a series that I have started pursuing since 2016, and it is a project and a series that contemplates belonging through a much more architectural approach. And what I'm doing here for Black Hat that was presented in the Singapore Biennale at the National Art Gallery Singapore was to look at the staircase site as a way to think about one's relationship with the ground. So this staircase leads somebody from the ground level, which is at the top, to the basement level of the National Art Gallery in Singapore. And what I wanted to do was to create a site-specific structure that makes full use of the characteristics of this staircase site. And what I did was to look at the height of every step going down from the ground, and using that to generate the staggered profile of the structure. So if you look at the, is it possible to scroll down to more images, Rami?
Sure, sure. Like this,
so this one.
Yeah.
The second one. So if you look at the dark gray part or the black part of the structure, it actually forms the cross section of the staircase. So it is a way of letting the site generate its own aesthetic and form.
And it's a site-specific project, and I see this. It has the same qualities and some similarities with the same project that you exhibited in a different place. Can you tell me a little bit about how do you work with the place with your background as an architect? I'm sure you come into a place, a space, and you start the thinking thought about your installation.
Yes.
Based on the nature and the characteristics of the space itself.
Yes, yes. I think my training as an architect allows me to approach a site or a space in several ways. I think the first way is to really think about the scale of a space. And by scale, I mean the relative relationship that a human body has with the space. So in conceiving a structure or an installation, that sense of scale is very important to me, because I can control to some extent, how a person would be experiencing the structure through thinking about the scale of the site and also of the installation. The second way of thinking about a site would be to look at the materiality, the surfaces, the sense of weight or the sense of lightness that certain materials offer. And again, how we physically and perhaps even culturally relate to different materials in a space. The third way of looking at spaces and sites that I learned through my architectural background was to think about the movement and vantage points that a site or space would offer. And that again would help to inform me about the peripheral spaces that I can potentially generate or design around the installation and the different approaches, sight lines, and so forth.
So I already shared the second example or the second phase of the same project. It's the same name,
Yes.
but it's quite different than what we saw before.
Yes.
And it's a good example for what you just said about the fact that the same project can turn out to be a very different shape based on the characteristics of the space and the scale of it, the material aspect of it, and the movement. So this is, I think this one was earlier project?
Yes, so this was part one of Black Hat. And it was presented at the Asia Pacific Triennale at the Queensland Art Gallery in Brisbane. The site, again, was very different to the Singapore one. The Singapore site offered a site that connected the ground with the basement. So it had a subterranean underground quality to it. Whereas this one in Australia, in Brisbane, the site that was offered to me had a mezzanine level above it. Hence, I was really thinking about something that was above ground. So in a sense, the two works are mirror images of each other, with the ground plane as the mirror plane, as the reflection plane. And this space that we are looking here in the Queensland Art Gallery is a very porous space that links the different collection galleries together. And I wanted to maintain or even reinforce that porosity by creating a structure that is very light, that has minimum walls, but that really address the different movements of people through this part of the museum. Although the two projects may look quite different, there are a number of important elements that tie them together. The first would be the use of this fossilized wood. If you look at this image, there are these cubes that are placed on the floor. Those were the same cubes that we saw earlier in the Singapore installation. These were fossilized wood. They are stones that came from pieces of wood that had been buried underground for many, many years. And minerals started to replace the wooden organic cells inside these trees. And over time, it becomes a piece of stone. This was sourced from Indonesia for both installations. Another element that connects the two structures together would be a sound piece titled Datum. It's a series of pulse-like sounds that were made by inverting sounds from a traditional Indonesian instrument called a gamelan. And these sounds were presented using a hyper-directional speaker at the imagined center of each of these structures. And also something that is very important to the Black Hat series is the use of a very special concrete. It is a concrete mix that had been infused with a large amount of salt to amplify a process called efflorescence or salt blooming. And it expresses the tropical and subtropical climate by having these salt crystals appearing over time on the concrete surface. So if you, perhaps if you scroll up to a close-up of the concrete.
This is the concrete part?
Oh. Yes, this is the concrete part.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was there an image that shows the concrete? Okay, maybe I don't have it on my website, but the white patches that you see over there, those were the salt crystals that had accumulated over time on the surface of the concrete through this efflorescence process. So
before we move on to the next project, I would want to ask you,
yes.
Those projects that are combining contemporary art and architecture and using those two approaches, maybe that's a point to wait 1 minute and ask, do you think coronavirus will change anything about architecture, anything about thinking about the space, about people's movement, like visitors are coming to the museum and they move maybe in a different way, in a way that we need to address in future projects?
I think that is a very good question and a very difficult one.
I'm sorry to put you.
No, I mean, it is a very interesting question because I hope that this coronavirus situation, I hope that it will help us think deeper into the way people congregate together. I think to some extent we have taken that for granted because of the years and years of globalization, air travel, and in the art world, we have been experiencing very large-scale events such as biennales and also international art fairs. And I think it is definitely worth to think about how a large number of people can congregate together in an event like a biennale. Having said that, I do not know exactly how spaces will change. I am very curious as well how it will change. Perhaps what will change would be the flow of people and the density of participants at any one time. But I am not sure whether there is going to be a significant paradigmic change to the way the architecture or the way museums or galleries are designed.
We spoke before about a little bit about art fairs, and it seems like they would be the fastest to adjust, at least in the short term. And there's already seems to be a lot of online solutions or ways to replace the regular experience of going to an art fair. Do you experience this also? Do you know anything about it? What do art fairs do right now?
Well, only based on the few that I see online, which are the large ones, like Basel and so forth. These galleries and these art fairs have started to offer what they call as virtual viewing rooms. So it's basically having images or videos of artworks that collectors are able to see through their laptops and personal devices. I think that's really a very short-term, immediate change that I noticed. As for how this would later develop post the COVID situation, I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, to be honest, I am an artist who is very interested in the material aspects of an artwork, and I wish that being able to be physically present before an artwork and to be able to experience it materially, perceiving it, sensorially, would continue. I think it is something very enjoyable and something very important. But however, I also think that there may be new potentials to be discovered in the online experience. For example, the technology for virtual reality is already being developed, although it is not yet mature. We are also looking at augmented reality. So perhaps in the future we can envision a sculpture popping out through our devices, in a physical space that we are in. And that may be a way to imagine or to perceive a three-dimensional object virtually. I don't know. There may be other haptic-based or touch-based technology being developed.
But I think still it's going to take quite a long time until technology will enable us to feel, let's say, the concrete floor that you just described with the crystallized patterns. It's going to be very hard to see, and like you, I don't think that the experience as a whole can be transmitted online. But some of the technologies are now being presented, and it's kind of a concern of mine that people will get used to it and will maybe forget. It's a bit of a childish concern maybe, but people will forget the experience of going to the actual gallery and seeing art. And there's like this one writer in Hebrew that wrote this short story. His name is Edgar Keret. And he wrote not about the art world, he wrote something more general about the fact that 3 days, he says that the story starts with like 3 days after the quarantine is finished, nobody really wants to get out of his home. And the police come to knock on your door and really trying to convince you to get out of your home and go to work and go to the park and go to the museum. So it's kind of a ridiculous exaggeration, but it has a small point that I'm finding concerning, that people will just get used to this online experience and will not get back to art shows and biennales and etc. And then, of course, the first that will be harmed from something like this would be the smaller galleries, I guess.
I don't know. I think if we think about this positively, we can perhaps also imagine the COVID situation to be a time where we think about the oversaturation of art events around the world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think you would agree with me if we look at the number of biennales, the number of art fairs in the past 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's simply too much to consume in a sense.
It
And
has
I
grown.
think if going to be a pullback in audience participation in this type of events, it may perhaps start to encourage organizers to really think very carefully about what they are exactly offering to the audience,
That's a very important
and
point.
hopefully that will then lead to a better thought out, more a quality presentation of art. And I think that smaller organizations are also um, strategically positioned to respond very, very quickly. I personally find that many smaller artistic events to be much more enjoyable, to
Mm-hmm.
be sharper in their message, in their themes, and in terms of the artistic presentation themselves, they were no less exciting than the ones presented in large platforms.
That's a very important point, and thank you for that. That's something that I will try to remember when thinking about the scale, maybe, and maybe also the kind of content that we want to have in the next Jerusalem Biennale. Maybe it's a good time to go to the third um project that we wanted to speak about, that you
Yeah.
presented in the Halvasser Gallery in New York just recently.
Yes, in September last year.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this was an exhibition of another series. As you can see, I work predominantly along several long-term series,
Mm-hmm.
and this series is very related to, again, the way I consumed popular media in my teenage years,
Mm-hmm.
those that were related to events happening in Indonesia, and also those that are related to popular culture. So the show was focused on the sense of how images played an important role in the geopolitics of the Cold War
Mm-hmm.
as it happened in Southeast Asia. I think I looked quite specifically to images of politicians who were involved in the Cold War events in Southeast Asia between the mid-60s to maybe early 70s. So I had images of politicians from China at the time, several politicians in Indonesia, and using techniques of drawing in negative, where audience can interact with this drawing using their mobile devices to view the positive images through the screen. For example, this image that you are showing right now on the right was a negative drawing that referenced a press photo of the Indonesian president at the time, Sukarno, when he met with the Chinese foreign minister at the time, Zhou Enlai. And using your iPad or iPhone with the colors invert switched on, the audience would be able to look at the positive image of this drawing through their phones. And on the left, that image was actually a photograph of one of the negative drawings that I had made earlier. So again, it's really about using techniques of drawing and of photography to convey this sense of relating to events and to histories and to memories through the space of the image of a very mediated way of perception.
We had a talk just a few days ago with Toby Khan, who's a New York-based artist. He said because of the quarantine, he's less able to go to his studio and like paint his big paintings and sculpture. So he's at home, and he, in a way, went back to his original medium of photography. So for you, the photography and the painting is also combined. You use both mediums, and you play with the transitions between the mediums.
Yes. However, the photographic process that I used to make works for this show, they relied a lot on studio-based techniques. For example, if you could scroll down further, yes. This installation, for example, consisted of a sculpture and a series of pinhole prints. So if you look at the sculpture, these black elements at the top of that sculpture, those were actually hats. They were hats that commonly worn by Javanese men in Indonesia. You may be able to recognize the form of these hats to relate with the Turkish fez hats.
It also reminds me of some Hasidic hats. There's like Jewish Hasidic hats that are
yes,
very similar. It's like a fairy. It's a fair, or
it is more like a cylinder in shape. Yeah, the top is flat. Yeah, and these hats were popularized by the founding president of Indonesia, Sukarno. And therefore, today, these hats are worn by the president, and it symbolizes the national identity of Indonesia in that sense. And I was looking at them from that angle. So what I've done was to transform the use of these heads by using them as pinhole cameras to produce the images that you see on the right of the sculpture. Yes.
Those.
So you look at the close-ups. These are negative images of the founding president, Sukarno, that was achieved by placing a photosensitive paper inside the heads and by making a tiny hole at the top of these heads. So we expose the photosensitive paper to these political images on the screen, and these are the results.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you said something about an installation at the porch of this gallery, I think.
Yes. So at the outside of the gallery was an outdoor terrace, and we saw an opportunity to engage with the street life along Madison Avenue, and again looking at the context of this show and looking at the theme of the Cold War in Southeast Asia. We decided to present this particular work that was titled "Art is Only a Continuation of War by Other Means." And we had the text encoded into these red and blue graphics on the flags. So if you are to look at the flags from left to right, each flag is a visual code for each word in the text. So you have the first flag on the left, for example, being read from top to bottom, and it would read art. So we combined two logic to make this work. The first logic has to do with the Morse code of the dots and the dash to spell a letter, and also the logic of the color of the light waves, where we use the long red and the short violet as a way to respond or to correspond with the dash and the dot respectively. So
I want to leave us a few minutes. I just lost time, and we're like very close to the end of our conversation, and we haven't spoken about your recent work, like really something that you're thinking about or developing right now. The latest project, which is not there yet. There's no images to show, but maybe you can tell us about this last project. It's also part of a series.
Yes. It's part of another series titled Path. It's a series that I started since 2012, and this would be the 11th work along this series. This coming work, which is Path 11, which I have titled Blindness, is the first time where I am looking at these invisible subatomic particles called muons. So muons are everywhere. It is right now with you as well, and they are passing through you, in fact, right now, as they pass through me. And these muons originally came from outer space, from supernova, from star explosions. And these cosmic rays constantly travel towards planets, and including Earth. And at the atmospheric level, they start to break into these muon particles. And this project was conceived before the COVID. And I felt that there is particular resonance with our current experience of having to deal with something that our eyes cannot see, and yet something that feels so near to us and our bodies. And I am looking at different ways to eventually visualize the presence of this nuance, because I am very much interested in the aspect of the distance that we have with these particles. I think at one hand, they are so close to us without us knowing, and yet they come from this really far away place. So I'm really thinking about the different contrasting relationships that we think about living in the city through this project.
So the blindness and is related obviously to the fact that we cannot see those particulars, but it's also connected to the city. The fact that we live, most of us, we live in big cities, and you combine those two elements, like the fact that we cannot see and the fact that we all live in a city, or that's just a wild interpretation?
Well, I think you have something there.
Okay.
I think what I had not mentioned about blindness was the aspect of the future. Because, especially in these times, we think a lot about the future. We think about how things will change. Are things going to be transformed forever from here? Is this going to be a new start? When will all this end? When will we ever get out of our homes again? When would treatments or vaccines be available for all of us? So I think this is really a time where we spend so much of our daily time thinking about what is coming next. And in a city like Singapore, the preoccupation with the future has always been there. And I believe it is the same for Israel as well. And so blindness also refers to this struggle, or the way we strain to see the future, but really nobody can see it. But that doesn't stop us from imagining what the future may be, to come up with different kinds of imagination, hypotheses, or even processes that we think would allow us to better see something that is essentially unseen. I was thinking along these lines when I thought about the muons and its presence in the city, and hence the title. I think blindness is also interesting in the context of photography, because this project, Part 11, was commissioned by a private foundation, and it is a photographic-based project. It is, it's part of the framework that the foundation had offered in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I felt it was very interesting to think about blind photography, to think about visualizing something that really cannot be seen. And yet there are other methods to think about is this presence, and to think about the visual not as a documentation of the subject matter, but more as a metaphor of the subject matter. Yeah.
And if we cannot see it, we better try to imagine it. So, I always end those conversations with a hope and a pray that we will be able to meet again and create art together again and experience art together again. And I agree with you so much that it's so hard to see what the future holds. But I'm leaving this conversation very optimistic about our possibility to imagine what would be, or maybe to even invent what would be. I want to thank you so much, Boedi Widjaja, for talking with me, for sharing with us your experiences and your work and your insights. And I want to wish you in Singapore and every place in the world much health and to get out of this situation stronger and more precise, maybe.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
For me too. So tonight we have at 9 p.m. It's in 3 hours, another talk with Andy Arnovich, which is based in Jerusalem. It's the only day we have 2 talks. And then in the rest of the week, we will have more talks. Please join us again at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time. Thank you again, Boedi Widjaja, and we will be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone wants to ask a question? If we have like a minute, I see people here are...
Do you find that what work you're doing during the corona when you're stuck in is very different than what you might have done otherwise?
I think the techniques involved may be very different because of the constraints of space and access to materials, access to tools. But I find that the core ideas or concerns don't really change. I think, in fact, the notion of social relations within life in the city has become very heightened because of the COVID situation. So I think that what the coronavirus situation has done is to, in fact, underscore or highlight certain aspects or certain concerns that are already present in my practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reva. Okay, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Stay safe and
stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.